Well, hey there, this is Dr. David Jockers, and today we're talking about testing liver function, key lab markers, and functional analysis. And so what you're going to learn today is the many roles of the liver. We're going to talk about phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification mechanisms. So there's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So we're actually going to go through all three of those. But I'm going to really break down a lot of the mechanisms of phase 2 liver detoxification in more specifics. We're going to go through signs and symptoms of poor phase 2 liver detox. We're going to talk about key nutrients that are needed for various phases of liver detox. And we're going to talk about lab testing signs of poor liver function. And so as a reminder, this video is not meant to diagnose, treat, or cure any medical condition, and it's for informational purposes only. This video is not a treatment protocol and does not replace a consultation with a healthcare practitioner. You are fully responsible for what you do or don't do with the information in this presentation. So with that said, let's talk about the liver and all the things it does. The liver is critical. We all think about it as the primary detoxification organ, which it is. But on top of that, it produces most of the proteins that are needed for the body to carry out different enzymatic functions, to carry hormones. It stores sugar in the form of glycogen for energy. It stores vitamins, minerals. It helps produce bile, right? It's actually where we produce bile, which is needed to digest fat and absorb vitamin A, D, vitamin E, vitamin K. It helps create ketone bodies. So we can't get fatty acids across the blood-brain barrier into the brain to be used for energy. So the liver will actually convert them into a water-soluble molecule that's smaller, and those can pass through the blood-brain barrier and create energy for the brain. They're called ketones. So the liver is responsible for that. It also is critical for activating basically converting inactive thyroid hormone T4 into the active form T3. So that's critical. And, we obviously need that process through glucuronidation and sulfation in order to get the active T3 component. So the thyroid produces 93% inactive thyroid hormone, and then it goes to the liver. 60% of the conversion into active thyroid hormone takes place in the liver. So really, really critical for that process. Very important for the immune system, for blood clotting, and then of course, detoxification. And so, when we're building toxins over time, at first, if we're not detoxifying effectively, we don't notice it. We don't notice symptoms, but over time, they will develop. When we use this leaky bucket analogy here, where, we don't actually notice the symptoms until the bucket starts overflowing. And that's when our toxic burden has gotten too big. And so we want a good detoxification system to keep these toxins under control over time. And so, we're constantly being exposed to toxins in our air, our water, and our food, but we want to be deactivating and eliminating those. Now, we don't actually store toxins in our liver. A lot of people think that. We don't store them in our liver. We store toxins typically in your fat cells. Okay, so if you have fatty liver, yes, you've got toxins on the fat that's attached to the liver, but we don't store toxins in the liver. We deactivate toxins. So we take it through a process, phase 1, phase 2. So phase 1 is kind of this whole process of oxidizing, reducing, hydrolyzing, hydrating, and dehalogenating all your different toxins, which converts them into a form that's actually more potentially dangerous. But then we conjugate them. So we actually change the toxin form 2 times, and phase 2 is conjugation. And now they're in a position where we can attach them to bile and move them out of the body through the feces, or they're water soluble and we can sweep them out through the urine, right? And the kidney will filter them out and pull these toxins out of the body. And so, or we'll sweat them out, or we'll breathe them out. So, that's really the way that we remove toxins is we sweat, we pee, we poop, and we breathe. And so we need to turn these toxins into a form that we can eliminate. And so your phase 1, right? So you have your different toxins that come in. It adds or subtracts electrons to put an electrical charge on the toxin. And it creates something called an intermediate metabolite. Okay, now there's also some byproducts. There are superoxide radicals and radical oxygen intermediates that come out. And these things create oxidative stress in the body. So they need to be buffered. And this is why antioxidants, for example, and having really good glutathione levels are important, because they help to deactivate these toxins. Phase 2 conjugates or attaches a toxin to other molecules to make them soluble for elimination. And then phase 3, now they're ready for elimination again. So they go to the kidneys, they go to the bile, obviously, which we store in our gallbladder, but we produce in our liver, helps bind them and excrete them, right, through the colon or through the urine. And so again, fat soluble toxins come in, we've got to convert them into a water soluble form that we can remove. So phase 1 is really led by these cytochrome P450 enzymes. We go through this process of oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis, hydration, and dehalogenation. We need key nutrients, vitamin B2, B3, B6, B12, really kind of like our full B complex, because folate is B9. We need adequate glutathione levels, which is our major antioxidant, because again, we've got these oxidative byproducts. We also need flavonoids. Flavonoids are powerful antioxidants as well that help to buffer the oxygen intermediates that come from the phase 1 process. Then now they're water soluble, right? Or that's really the goal, is to turn them into water soluble form. So we have to conjugate them. And we do that through these pathways: sulfation, glucuronidation, methylation, glutathione conjugation, acetylation, and amino acid conjugation. And probably the major form of amino acid conjugation is glycination, or glycine as the amino acid that's conjugating them. And then of course we eliminate them: urine, right, in the bile, through the stool. And key nutrients, we need some of these sulfur compounds: cysteine, methionine, or sulfur containing amino acids. Magnesium is critical here. Glutathione, vitamin B5, B12, vitamin C, and then other amino acids: glycine, taurine, glutamine, right? Folate, again, B vitamin, and choline. So we need these nutrients for this process. Now, so phase 2, we're in phase 2, and we're looking at sulfation. Sulfation is one of the major pathways involved in liver detoxification. It's critical for that T4 to T3 conversion. So if we're not converting that well, we may have a liver issue. We may need to address sulfation pathways. It's also very important for sex and steroid hormones, and getting rid of, excess estrogen in the system as well. Important for our body deactivating catecholamines. So if we feel anxious all the time, right, we may not have good elimination, breakdown and elimination of stress hormones, xenobiotics, BPA, and other phthalates, right? So, different things, herbicides, xenobiotics would be like herbicides, pesticides, things like that. BPA, phthalates coming from plastics. So we need really good sulfation in order to eliminate these key nutrients. So we talked about some of these: methionine, taurine, cysteine. These are sulfur containing amino acids, magnesium, zinc, all critical for this process. And then the best foods that enhance that are your cruciferous veggies, your allium family, garlic, onions. These are sulfur-rich foods. So cruciferous veggies, that's broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, bok choy, different things like that, collard greens, kale, all in that cruciferous family, allium family, garlic, onions, leeks, chives, right? So those all have these sulfur compounds. Radishes are a cruciferous veggie that really helps with this process as well. And then you've got eggs and meat, right, that are also rich in sulfur compounds. Now, the SALT enzymes are, you can actually, when you get your genetic tests done, you can actually look to see, do you have a polymorphism at the SALT enzymes, right? Because that would impact your sulfation processes, and you may need to support these processes more. Okay, another key nutrient actually that's not on this sheet is molybdenum. Molybdenum is also very, very important. We can find that in legumes, and we can also find it in meat and animal products, eggs and meat and things like that. Lifestyle strategies, Epsom salt baths can be really helpful here. You got magnesium sulfate, right? So magnesium's needed, and then it also adds more sulfur compounds from the Epsom salt. Sun exposure as well. Sun exposure is very important for sulfation in the body, right? The overall sulfation process. So signs of poor sulfation are going to be things like autism, asthma, neurodegenerative conditions, migraines, chemical sensitivities, chronic fatigue syndrome, hormone imbalances, anxiety, and depression. So really almost all the major health challenges that people are dealing with, particularly a lot of brain mitochondrial type issues that you can see there are associated with poor sulfation. So uric acid levels. Uric acid is a waste product found in your blood. It's created when the body breaks down chemicals called purines. Most uric acid dissolves in the blood and passes through the kidneys and leaves the body in urine. Higher than normal uric acid levels in the blood are called hyperuricemia. And that can be caused by the overproduction of uric acid in the body or the inability of the kidneys to adequately remove enough uric acid from the body. So, uric acid is, goes out in the urine, right? It's what makes urine. And so your functional range, we can test this in your blood and see how much uric acid is in your blood. For men, it should be between 3.7 and 6 milligrams per deciliter. Men are going to have a little bit more than women. Women, 3.5 to 5.5. High levels are typically a marker, like if you have high levels of uric acid, typically a marker of insulin resistance and high oxidative stress in the body. And it's often associated with gout and high blood pressure, right? So people have high uric acid tend to have high blood pressure, high oxidative stress and inflammation. They tend to have gout, and they tend to have high levels of fasting insulin or insulin resistance where their cells are not responding to it. Low levels, though, can also be a factor. In fact, a lab test marker for impaired sulfation is low uric acid levels, under 3.5 milligrams per deciliter, and especially if it's under 3 milligrams per deciliter. Okay, so we actually should have a certain amount of uric acid, and that's a sign that we're really not breaking down protein effectively, which obviously can be related to low stomach acid, can also be related to molybdenum issues, right? Liver, kidney issues, and in some cases B12 and folate, like methylation types of problems. Obviously, if the kidney's having issues, the liver's having issues, we're not going to be able to, produce the right amount of uric acid. Okay. So again, it's a waste product, but it's something that we need to do. We need to be able to break it down from these purines, right? Or we get other toxic metabolites that are formed as well. So sulfur compounds are necessary, right? So we talked about some of the best foods, again, broccoli, eggs, grass-fed meats, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, leeks, garlic. Seafood can be a really good source, cabbage, kale, collard greens, radishes, right? So these are kinds of foods we want to be consuming to support phase 2 detoxification. If you're noticing eating these foods causes a lot of issues for you, right? You're not responding well. You may have a food sensitivity, right? You may also have, a lot of these are high in FODMAPs. So you may have issues with bacterial overgrowth in your small intestine that are breaking these down. So that may need to be addressed. But also on top of that, you may not have enough molybdenum, right? For some people, they're eating grass-fed meats or eating these kinds of foods, and they're not responding well to them. That could be a molybdenum issue as well. So you may need to support that. Glucuronidation. Glucuronidation is one of the most important pathways for phase 2 detoxification. And there's much overlap between sulfation and glucuronidation. For example, glucuronidation, very important for thyroid hormone conversion again, sex hormone conversion. It also plays an important role with mycotoxins, helping our body metabolize those, getting rid of bilirubin, which is how we make bile, right? And bilirubin is a breakdown product of red blood cells. So we take that, we throw it in the bile to help kind of eliminate it. And so it's an important process as far as that goes. And also helping get rid of some medications, things like Tylenol, NSAIDs, codeine, morphine, benzodiazepines, and lorazepam. Okay, it's estimated that around 50% of all medications are metabolized by glucuronidation. So very important. And the activity of the UGT enzymes, so you can look at that again on a genetic profile. And so they are important for operating the process of glucuronidation. And there's a condition called Gilbert's syndrome. That's an autosomal dominant disorder. I'm going to talk about that in a second here, because that's important to understand. and I've seen it many times on labs, the glucuronidation process depends on a healthy gut microbiome. That's important. There's an enzyme in the gut called beta glucuronidase, which we can actually look at this on a stool test as well. Beta glucuronidase, that enzyme can cleave the metabolites, such as estrogen, from glucuronidation. So they take the conjugation compound away from them and free up more of these estrogens, right? So these metabolites now are reabsorbed, which increase the message of estrogen, which is growth, right? And too much estrogen in the system can cause things like breast cancer, uterine, ovarian cancer. For men, prostate, colon cancer are associated with this. So it causes a lot of problems. For women, also fibrocystic breast, endometriosis, these can be associated with too much estrogen as well. Perimenopausal symptoms, premenstrual cramps, things like that all can be associated with this. So beta glucuronidase, we want to keep that under control. And so we've got to also address the gut, which is important here. So again, we don't want to allow these higher amounts of estrogens to be put back into the system. So we can measure beta glucuronidase, right? We can also look at different things. Gilbert's syndrome, we'll talk about this real quick. It's a liver condition characterized by high bilirubin levels. Again, glucuronidation is critical for helping get rid of these bilirubin, helping our body metabolize bilirubin, put it into bile. So on a lab test, you'll see bilirubin elevated, okay? But your liver enzymes will be normal, but bilirubin will be elevated, okay? And that's thought to be benign, right? It's thought to not be a major issue because it's usually asymptomatic. Rarely somebody may have jaundice where they're kind of yellowing of the skin, but we found that these people are at higher risk for gallstones, right? So they're at higher risk here. So possibly taking some bile salts, right, and supporting glucuronidation process can be really helpful. So things like TUDCA, taurine, choline, and herbs like dandelion, artichoke, and ginger can be very helpful for helping thin the bile and helping the body to put bilirubin into bile, right? So that's key. So again, key enzymes here, the UDP and UGT enzymes are critical, right? And you can look at those on your genetic test. Metabolizes sex, steroid, and thyroid hormones, mycotoxins, bilirubin, a lot of your different drugs, right? Like I mentioned, I believe it was over 50% of different types of medications metabolized through glucuronidation. Key nutrients needed, right? In fact, when you see high beta glucuronidase, one of the things we look at and focus on is calcium D-glucarate. Also, glucuronic acid is important. You get that in, for example, apple cider vinegar, natural source of glucuronic acid. So it's good for phase 2 liver detox and supporting glucuronidation. Magnesium is important here. Plant flavonoids. Okay, so that's going to be, your green tea, your EGCG, your dark chocolate, which has that in there as well. It's going to be your curcumin, your bioflavonoids coming from citrus, right? Your quercetin, different things like that. Healthy gut bacteria, again, important for the breakdown here and keeping beta glucuronidase under control and helping to sweep things through the gut and through the colon. So warning signs of poor glucuronidation. Gilbert's syndrome, where you have the high bilirubin, normal liver enzymes. So if you see high bilirubin, you got to be thinking, I want to support glucuronidation. I want to be supporting bile flow. So calcium D-glucarate could be important there. And also things like TUDCA, artichoke, milk thistle can actually be very helpful there. Taurine, choline, those bile salts. Other symptoms, fatigue, low thyroid symptoms. If we're not converting enough T4 to T3, obviously, we're going to have low thyroid symptoms, high estrogen levels, because again, this is important for metabolizing estrogen. So sulfation and glucuronidation are two key pathways here for sex hormone metabolism. Gallstones, another big one, increased risk of cancers. So we talked about, some of those higher estrogen cancers, and then also increased risk of neurodegenerative conditions as well. Important. Methylation. Methylation is a critical process in the liver, but also throughout all the cells of the body. Methyl conjugation occurs through a family of enzymes called methyltransferases. So it's happening in all the cells of the body. but it's happening in, in greater preponderancy in the liver, right? So liver's a major area of methylation. And one of the key enzymes is catechol O-methyltransferase, which is known for its role in metabolizing estrogens and catecholamines, okay? So methylation is also very key here for this process of metabolizing your different estrogens. And obviously, again, like I was talking about anxiety, different things like that. Another pathway we've got to look at is methylation, right? So sulfation, glucuronidation, methylation. There's a lot of crossover between those. Okay, they're probably the three, seemingly like they seemingly do the most work in phase 2 liver detox, although the other pathways are also very important. Okay, so we need some certain amino acids, methionine. Okay, we need choline, a compound called choline. We need B12. Choline is actually a bile salt, right? But it also does other things as well. And we also need active folate. Methylation is a key process. It's including choline's important part of the methylation process, right? It's important for metabolizing estrogen, catecholamines, histamine, heavy metals such as arsenic, pesticides, polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons from smoke and grilled foods, and phenols found in plastics and petroleum. So you got to see this pathway. We eat protein, we get methionine from our diet. Methionine can go one of two ways, right? So there's certain enzymes, your methyltransferase enzyme, your MTHFR enzyme, right? So these enzymes, which need folate, B12, B2, and zinc, MTHFR, which needs also trimethylglycine and turn into SAMe. And then it can also go the glutathione pathway, needing B6, B2, and zinc, right, to go down that pathway. And so, and then depending on certain enzymes as well, the CBS enzyme, for example, right? So if we're seeing high homocysteine, it's typically poor methylation. So we want to address it with things like B vitamins, vitamin B2, B6, B12, folate, trimethylglycine, and possibly some zinc. We may also be zinc deficient. So impaired methylation is often impaired due to dysfunctional genes. You've probably heard of the MTHFR gene, but there's also COMT. And CBS gene actually can impact it as well. Methylation genes tell us genetic predisposition. That's important because a lot of people will think, oh, I have MTHFR, I'm in trouble. I can't methylate. I'm going to die early here. I'm going to get sick. That's not necessarily true because it does not tell us your phenotypic expression, how your body's expressing those genes. And that can be modulated by nutrient levels, gut health, toxic load, and the use of methylation inhibitors like drugs like PPIs, for example, proton pump inhibitors, birth control pills, antibiotics, nitrous oxide, valproic acid, and cholestyramine can all inhibit methylation. Also, a diet high in sugar, and particularly a sugar type called sucrose, may also impair methylation. Additionally, poor stomach acid levels or poor nutritional habits can lead to deficiencies in key amino acids, such as folate, B6, B12. We need stomach acid to be able to absorb vitamin B12, to break down these, food, vegetables, for example, into folate, B6, or meat into some of these compounds like B6. We need good stomach acid. We need good digestive enzymes. So if we're digestively impaired, we're not going to be able to absorb a lot of these. Magnesium, zinc. Zinc is super dependent upon good stomach acid levels. So that's another one to really key in there. Now, some lab signs of poor methylation include high homocysteine levels, over 9. So if we're seeing it up over 9, this is a sign of poor methylation. We really want to address that because high homocysteine is associated with Alzheimer's disease, dementia, stroke, heart disease. So it's a very inflammatory protein that we need to methylate, right? And we keep in balance. We may also see, let's say we, on our labs, we don't get homocysteine run, so we don't know where it is, but we can look at your red blood cell mean corpuscular volume, your MCV, and that should be between 85 and 92, okay? If it's not there, if it's up higher, 95, 96, 97, okay, that's a sign you're probably not methylating well. We can also look at your red blood cell folate and your serum B12, or your methylmalonic acid is another marker we can look at as well to see how well your body is absorbing and utilizing things like B12 and folate. Now, supporting methylation, you want to eat a nutrient-rich diet that has grass-fed animal products. That's going to give you amino acids, vitamin B6, zinc, vitamin B12. Pasture-raised eggs, that's the best source of choline, right? So choline is naturally in there, phosphatidylcholine, great source in pasture-raised eggs. You're also going to get different amino acids, methionine, right? Like we talked about, taurine. And then green leafy veggies. That's where we're going to get a lot of magnesium, a lot of folate, and that will provide the key nutrients you need. You want to make sure you're producing adequate stomach acid levels, or the protein you're eating is not going to digest right. You're not going to break down the amino acids. You're not going to be able to get the B12, the zinc that you need. Those are very much dependent on good stomach acid. If you're not producing enough stomach acid, then oftentimes you're not going to absorb zinc, and oftentimes you won't absorb enough B12 from your diet. So got to support stomach acid levels. And you can also supplement with methyl B12, methylfolate, trimethylglycine, and P5P, which is the active form of vitamin B6, magnesium, zinc, choline, methionine, and SAMe. And sometimes you can just find really like a supplemental protein powder, for example, that has, all of these things in it. They make a lot of these for phase 1 through 3 liver detox. So sometimes you don't need to supplement specifically, with all of these from, different pills. And sometimes you can find like a methylation support if you need that. But a lot of times you can just get all of these in like a protein powder form that has kind of your full phase 1 through 3 liver detox system in it to help support liver function. Now let's talk about glutathione. Glutathione is the body's master antioxidant, super critical. Glutathione conjugation here. Very, very important glutathione for every cell of the body, but also especially important for liver health. So the main factor that impairs glutathione conjugation is glutathione depletion. This can be due to an overabundance of toxic exposure in either a short period of time or over a chronic period of time. So mold and mycotoxin exposure depletes glutathione. Air pollution, if you're around that all the time, if you're smoking or you're around somebody that's smoking all the time, that can deplete glutathione levels. Chronic infections. So if you have a chronic viral infection or chronic bacterial infection or parasitic infection, that can drive down your glutathione. If you're loaded with pesticides and herbicides, let's say you do your own lawn care and you're using a lot of pesticides and herbicides, okay, you may be being exposed to that, breathing that in, okay, or you work in an industry that does that. A lot of industries, cleaning people that do clean houses and stuff, and they're spraying all different types of chemical sprays, going to deplete your glutathione levels over time. Heavy metal exposure, heavy metals from certain foods we eat, from different exposures, amalgam fillings in our mouth, vaccines, different things like that can all cause issues as well with glutathione. Radiation exposure. So, there's low level radiation, and some people are exposed to higher levels of radiation as well. Many chronic illnesses are associated with low glutathione levels from years of glutathione depletion, which leads to heavy oxidative stress, accelerated aging, and sluggish detoxification. So supporting glutathione levels, very much like supporting sulfation. So all those sulfur groups, garlic, eggs, we need cysteine as one of the key amino acids, the rate limiting amino acid here. So grass-fed meats, onions, cruciferous veggies, asparagus, avocados, all provide sulfur compounds and cysteine to support glutathione. And then there are key supplements that help as well. Selenium actually will help with glutathione levels. Vitamin C will. N-acetylcysteine, NAC, which is the major precursor to glutathione. Alpha lipoic acid has been shown to greatly improve glutathione levels. And then you can also get liposomal or acetylated glutathione. Glutathione is a tripeptide. There's 3 amino acids. So if you try to eat just glutathione, your body will break it into those amino acids. So it doesn't work to eat it, but you can take it in a form that bypasses the digestive system. That's going to be liposomal or acetylated forms of glutathione that can work very effectively. Now let's talk about acetylation. Okay, this depends on key enzymes, the NAT and NAT2 and alpha acetyltransferase enzymes, which are very, very important here. Okay, and acetylation basically takes an acetyl-CoA molecule and attaches it to a toxin, right? So that's basically what it's doing. Very important for metabolizing caffeine. Histamine, right? So there's a lot of people dealing with histamine intolerance. Acetylation is critical here. Caffeine as well, right? A lot of people take caffeine and they just feel terrible. It makes them feel anxious and jittery, and that can be an issue with acetylation. Aromatic amines, benzodiazepines. A lot of people struggle with sulfur-based antibiotics. That can be a sign of poor acetylation here, and other meds as well. So if you're having poor issues with different medications, it could be glucuronidation, but also could be acetylation, right? Acetylation's responsible for a lot of these medications as well. Here's some warning signs that you're not doing, you have poor acetylation. Inability to tolerate caffeine can be an issue. Okay. And some people have, if you have an enzyme, if you have a mutation of polymorphism at the NAT and NAT2 enzymes, you may not be able to tolerate caffeine well. Histamine intolerance, chemical sensitivities, poor reaction to antibiotics and sedatives, right? So those are things to look out for. If you have these chemical sensitivities that just seem to be going off, you're probably reacting to different types of aromatic amines that you're being exposed to in, perfumes and all different types of things like that. Key nutrients needed: magnesium, vitamin B1 and B5, and vitamin C as well here. So super important stuff. Now let's talk about the process of glycination or amino acid conjugation in the liver. The key amino acid that's conjugated here is glycine, right? And it's important for metabolizing salicylates. Okay, where do we find salicylates? We're going to find them in things like aspirin, Alka-Seltzer, NSAID medications, Tylenol, ibuprofen, things like that. They're also in a lot of personal care products, and they're also in certain foods like nuts, berries, celery, and cinnamon. And some people actually, because of poor glycination, they actually do much better when they're on a diet low in salicylates, right? Or at least for a period of time. So if you have a genetic polymorphism at the glycine and acetyltransferase enzyme, that could predispose you to these issues. And so some warning signs here: hepatitis, liver cancer, lethargy, just low energy, hyperactivity. Hyperactivity is a big one for kids. And sometimes taking out salicylates, lowering salicylates can be a critical factor here. Or also, and you can do both of these: lower salicylates, add in magnesium, B6, and glycine, right? And I'll talk about, best sources there in a second. Skin rashes and eczema is a big one to consider. Is how well, a lot of people will say, oh, it's a liver issue, right? And it can be, right? It can actually be related to this sort of glycination process. And sometimes that happens when you're not breaking down salicylates. So, so addressing that's key. Rosacea, hives, itchy skin, respiratory issues, headaches, and cognitive difficulties. And again, the inability to metabolize aspirin and other salicylates. So that's a good thing to ask in a questionnaire is, hey, are you able to metabolize aspirin? Have you ever had a bad side effect to aspirin or to antibiotics, right? You can ask that question. And sometimes people will say yes, and it's kind of cluing you in. There could be an issue here with glycination. So glycine, again, is the critical amino acid here, critical for this liver detoxification process, but also for healthy skin and collagen formation, joint integrity, muscle growth, and immune function. So very important. By far the best food sources are going to come from basically cartilaginous structures of animals. So that's going to be bones, like bone broth, for example, amazing source of glycine. Your different tendons. So a lot of times in America and other westernized countries, we're really focusing only on eating muscle meats, right? Muscle meats tend to taste better. They're easier to chew. We're not eating the collagenous structures, right? So the joint capsule, the tough types of meat where the tendons are attaching to bones, that is where the major source of glycine is going to come from. So your best sources are going to be bone broth, collagen protein, tendons, and collagenous meat sources, like eating a drumstick or a chicken wing, right? And actually eating the joint capsule can be really powerful here. Red meat, right? So now all your other sources after those three are significantly lower, but you'll get some glycine from red meat, poultry, seafood, peas, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, lentils, and legumes, but not nearly the amount that you'll get from bone broth, collagen protein, tendons, and collagenous meat structures. So here is one reason why our modern diet, again, I talked about, we're eating all this muscle meat. We're not eating as much animal cartilage. And that's what our ancestors, they used to eat this animal cartilage. They would cook up bones and make some sort of bone broth. They would, of course, eat as much of the animal as possible. And so there was so much collagen coming from skin, coming from joints, tendons, right? The tough meat. They would eat that because they didn't know that, they didn't have access to a lot of food. And so whatever they killed, they ate. And so they didn't have a choice of just eating, the ribeye steak, right? They would eat the whole thing. And so today's day and age, though, we're not doing that. And so this is causing an imbalance between methionine and glycine, as well as tryptophan and glycine. So the major amino acids we're getting in the muscle meat are methionine and tryptophan. And if we're eating too much of those, we need them for sure. And we talked about methionine, super important for phase 2 liver with sulfation, but we don't want too much methionine compared to glycine. That can create more inflammation and poor detoxification, can increase your risk of joint injuries, insomnia and anxiety, cardiovascular disease, stroke, and Alzheimer's. So obviously we want to balance it with the glycine. This is where, again, doing bone broth protein can be really helpful. If we're taking in too much tryptophan, then that tryptophan to glycine ratio will increase your risk of daytime drowsiness and fatigue, and can increase the risk of heart arrhythmias as well. So let's now talk about some of our liver enzymes. We went through all those phase 2 pathways. On a lab test, you're going to look at some liver enzymes, right? So ALT, alanine aminotransferase, and I like to see these levels between 10 and 26. Now, some functional practitioners want to see them under 21. Okay. So between 10 and 21, when it starts creeping up over 21, I start thinking, okay, there may be something going on here, maybe some liver stress. Okay. But until it's up over 26, I'm not making that a major priority typically in the, healthcare treatment. But I am starting to take note if it's on that upper end, right? So 20 and above, I start to take note of it for sure. Low levels, so if it's under 10, it's oftentimes a B6 deficiency. B6 is critical for the production of these liver enzymes, right? ALT, AST, GGT, and ALP were alkaline phosphatase. Now, alkaline phosphatase is very zinc dependent, right? So it should optimal levels are between 55 and 95, and really like 60 and 90 is probably a more accurate range there. High levels, when we're looking at alkaline phosphatase, is an indication of liver and biliary stress, right? Particularly and gallbladder for sure, right? And so if we're seeing high levels of alkaline phosphatase, unless the person is growing, right? So growing bones, like a child with growing bones or somebody that's had a fracture, possibly even osteoporosis. Outside of that, it's oftentimes a sign of something going on, particularly in the gallbladder. So definitely something to look out for. Low levels, we got to be thinking zinc, right? Getting more zinc into the system. GGT is more specific to the biliary tree. So if we're seeing GGT high, but ALT, AST normal, let's say, we got to be thinking there's some sort of issue, inflammation in the biliary tree or the bile duct. Okay. If we're seeing AST high, but ALT and GGT more normal levels, but AST is way up high, that is a sign of inflammation, because AST we actually find in our heart, we find it in our kidneys, our muscles. So that's a sign that there's more of an issue coming from one of those regions. And if we see ALT higher than the other ones, then we're thinking liver. So ALT, liver, specific to the liver. AST could be an issue in the heart, could be an issue in the muscle, kidneys. GGT, we're thinking biliary tree, so the bile ducts themselves. And then alkaline phosphatase, if we're seeing that up high, then we are thinking an issue with the gallbladder, right? Now, if your gallbladder is gone, then I would think bile duct, okay? Unless, again, there was a fracture or some sort of bone growth going on. If it's low, we're thinking zinc. If these other liver enzymes are low, GGT, ALT, AST, we're thinking B6 issues. Okay, now key blood test markers for abnormal bile flow. Again, high alkaline phosphatase, high liver enzymes, and high bilirubin levels. So that's the thing we want to look at when we're considering bile flow. Okay, again, there's that Gilbert's syndrome, Gilbert's syndrome, where we have high bilirubin, but we have normal liver enzymes. And alkaline phosphatase is usually normal in that as well. So that's Gilbert's syndrome, I think is a proper way, French name, proper way to say that. Lactate dehydrogenase, or LDH. It's a marker of glycolytic energy production. High levels are an indication of high levels of cellular oxidative stress. So somebody has a heart attack, they're going to have really high levels of LDH, right? But if their heart is inflamed or their liver is inflamed, that's going to create more LDH to spill out as well. Now, low levels of LDH are a marker of hypoglycemia, where the body's not good at converting energy from sugar. And so for these people, sometimes they can struggle with fasting, for example, if their LDH is under 140. We need to get them more metabolically stronger so we can start to lean into fasting and allow their body to tolerate it well. Now, oxidative stress, I'm sure most of you guys are listening have heard of this, but we're exposed to all these different things that create oxidative damage. UV light, air pollution, ionizing radiation, inflammation, infections, smoking, right? All this stuff creates oxidative stress, which is basically where, we lose. So there's a free radical that has a missing electron in its outer layer, right? And so it's trying to steal an electron from another molecule, and it creates damage when it does that. An antioxidant comes in and just donates an electron and balances the charge on the free radical, right? So it helps balance that. And now it creates, doesn't create the damage, the oxidative stress. And so the cells are able to stay healthy. And so there are some markers for high levels of oxidative stress. Now, albumin is a critical blood protein that helps move small molecules and nutrients through the blood. And it plays a critical role in stabilizing the osmotic pressure in the blood so fluid doesn't leak out into the tissues. So if we have low albumin, oftentimes we'll end up with edema and swelling in our lower extremities. Now, high albumin levels on a blood test, so up over 5 grams per deciliter, most common cause of that is going to be dehydration, right? Now, there are other markers we can look at for dehydration. For example, if we see both sodium and potassium elevated above their functional range, which for sodium is 143, potassium is 4.5. If we're seeing both of those elevated, that's a sign of dehydration as well. If we only see one of them elevated, like just potassium and sodium is low, or just sodium and potassium is low, that could be an issue with adrenal function, right? And so we'll address that in a different video. But your serum albumin should be between 4 and 5 grams per deciliter. If it's low, that could be a sign of a liver issue because albumin is produced in the liver. So we have to be able to look at that. Oxidative stress signals are when albumin is low, again, under 4 grams per deciliter. Uric acid levels, right? So if uric acid is low, we talked about that being a marker for low sulfation. But if it's high, that's a sign of oxidative stress. High or low platelets, right? So if platelets are either very high or very low, that can be a sign of oxidative stress. High platelets associated with inflammation. High LDL to HDL ratio. So normally this should be under 3:1. So if it's high, we're thinking that could be related to oxidative stress. There could be some other factors too, like not enough sunshine, vitamin D, food sensitivity sometimes can drive that up, insulin resistance, right? But of course, that insulin resistance, of course, is associated with oxidative stress. So that would be why the LDL to HDL ratio would be over 3:1. And then high globulin levels. So if we're seeing globulin levels up over 2.8, that could also be a sign of oxidative stress. So I know we went through a lot today in this presentation. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of it. And, we do offer a comprehensive blood analysis that really goes through all this measures these things that we talked about: uric acid, albumin, all the liver enzymes, right? And then so much more as well. So you can always check that out on drjockers.com. And we will see you guys in a future video. Be blessed.